Grab that pen, grab that pencil, grab that marker, whatever, and start drawing. So I received a question from a listener about intrusive thoughts while drawing. And that's really my main focus on this channel. That's kind of why I made this. So unsurprisingly, I really dove in on it. We're past the turn on this channel, so I'm just gonna go nuts. This is going to be a two-parter. We'll discuss intrusive thoughts and drawing in this one, and tomorrow we'll break down our connection to thoughts in general. So let's start things off with the question from Brian Yoon. Hello. I have a pretty hard time being able to focus on drawing. For some reason, I find myself unable to perceive what I see on the page and too lost in internal dialogue to be able to focus. How do you think, or what do you focus on when you draw? Do you mainly visualize when you draw? Thanks for the question, Brian. It's a very good one. First, let me say that I don't spend too much time actively visualizing while I draw. I talk about this briefly in my recently posted conversation with Ahmed Al-Duri. While I can picture things in my mind vividly, that doesn't really get a lot of use while I'm working. If there's a particularly problematic area of a drawing, I might stop and imagine some solutions instead of trying them out on the page. But really, the vast majority of the work is a reaction to what's already on the paper. Now, as to the other part of your question, about being unable to perceive what's on the page and being too lost in internal dialogue. You asked me, how do you think, or what do you focus on when you draw? I don't try to control my thoughts very much at all while I work. I don't make any effort to edit my thinking or to control the focus of my internal thought stream. I don't do this because I don't think it's possible. Thoughts arise, abide, and dissolve all on their own. You can't guess what you're going to think next, and making any active attempt to suppress or simplify your thought stream usually just results in it surging instead. The goal is instead to experience those thoughts from a place of peace, which is a condition that can be developed through sustained practice. I obviously don't know the specifics of your situation, but I'm going to take some guesses based on your question. If you feel, as you say, too lost in internal dialogue to be able to focus, the problem is likely not the dialogue, not the content itself, but rather your connection and attachment to it. I'm of course excluding from this thoughts and dialogues relating to trauma, in which case the contents of the thoughts really do carry consequential baggage. But aside from strong, persistent trauma, at a certain point, the ability for a thought to distract us, confuse us, and emotionally compromise us is a power that we grant to thought ourselves. It's not intrinsic to the thought itself at all. We've been conditioned to believe that this arbitrary, unchosen thread of linguistic ephemera has a necessary reaction, an appropriate emotional response that needs to be carried out. And it is almost always done compulsively. But it doesn't need to be that way. So let me put my experience up against this. Like I said, I don't try to control my thinking or focus when I draw. I get blown around by the same or similar internal dialogues to the ones you're experiencing, I'm sure, but I don't connect with them strongly, at least not in this context. I've practiced seeing these thoughts, these streams of thoughts, for what they are, passing clouds in the sky of the mind. And through practice, I have made slow tectonic shifts in my initial reactions to them. The most direct form of practice for this is to take up sitting meditation. That way you can practice perceiving and understanding these internal dialogues without anything else piled on, like drawing. But after a certain point, drawing really is a perfect place to do the same things that you do in sitting meditation. That's kind of the whole point I'm trying to make on this channel. I do think it's hard to do this when you're in the absolute beginner stage, because in that stage, many people's drawing actions are directly tied to cognitive linguistic structures that are guiding them. In other words, there can be very little automatic drawing in the beginner stages. But after even the most rudimentary familiarity with drawing has been established, so much of the work begins to be done automatically that there is tons of room to practice your self-awareness and self-perception while you work. You may also have a low fatigue threshold at this point, which is totally normal and is something that gets increased over time. Feeling like you said that you are unable to perceive what is on the page is indicative of that. I think you're describing a haze of confusion and a lack of direction that settles on us at a certain point in the drawing's progression. Of course, you're literally perceiving the drawing the same way. The light photon input hasn't changed, but you've instead lost your insight. You can no longer look at some part of the drawing and know what needs to happen next. That's a good time to shelve it, if you can, and go take a walk or work on something else. Fatigue is natural, so be kind to yourself and understand it as part of the process and go recharge. Then, take a look at it later, and you might find you know exactly what needs to happen. But, natural fatigue aside, if the internal thoughts and dialogues are what's carrying you away and making it hard to focus, follow this simple procedure. First, handle your life hygiene. So make sure that you're eating healthy, getting exercise, and petting dogs before moving on to anything else. 90% of stressors and insistent anxiety are connected to these things, and it gets underaddressed. If your reaction to hearing that was a turning stomach and a guilty feeling, that means it's time to turn this video off and go for a run or do some yoga. Don't trick yourself into thinking that the problem lies in what I'm going to talk about after this without addressing these overarching life issues first. Most importantly, this is the essential first step to addressing stress and anxiety in your practice, because if you've worked out and eaten right for the day, and you go through some turmoil with your practice, it's very reassuring to know it's actually about the practice and not about these other things. It gives you license to take the anxiety very seriously. Second, evaluate if you're a beginner who should address the anxiety outside of the drawing practice, or you have some traction on drawing and can take a stab at addressing it during. If you're a beginner who hasn't been drawing long, I wouldn't add the confusion of self-perception to the mix. It'll make it harder to draw and harder to maintain awareness. If you're more advanced and some portions of drawing, upon close inspection, occur without much forethought, go ahead and do it during. Third, practice. If you're a beginner, I would advise adding a 5 to 10 minute period of contemplation before your drawing session. Most likely, the thoughts that were going to rise up and distract you while working are going to instead show up in this period where you are still and you can address them without distraction. To address them, the actual act of doing it, all you need to do is become aware of them and see them for what they are. Just thoughts, passing clouds in the sky of the mind. This moment of awareness can occur at any time in the life of the thought. As it arises, right in the middle of its logical unraveling, or it can come when the thought has run its course completely as you enter the brief gap between thoughts. Any time is fine. Just notice that you noticed the thought. And then notice if you're having an emotional or physical reaction to the thought. Whatever arises, just feel it. Don't judge it. Don't push it away. Don't cling to it. You can't actually do those things anyway. There is no substance to thoughts. There's nothing to grab onto. If you need to see the disconnect between you and your thoughts clearly, try this exercise. When you become aware of a thought stream that produces an especially strong reaction, the kind of internal dialogue that might distract you from working, upon becoming aware of it, try to willfully continue the thought stream instead of being lived by the thought as you previously were. You'll see this cripples the thought and removes the emotional impact. Here's an example. Let's say you're stressed about a job interview. You're at the point where you're aware that you're having a stress reaction to it. You're tuning in occasionally and realizing you're having racing, anxious thoughts about the interview, and you find yourself wishing you could stop them. Here, usually, we try to take some willful action to suppress them, or we might go try to distract ourselves with some food or fun or something. At this turn, where you try to disengage and do something else, instead, sit for a moment and try to continue the thought stream, like a game. In your mind, try to consciously speak to yourself the continuation of the script that thought is performing, and try to do it energetically enough that it contains all of the angst and anxiety that goes with those linguistic formations. You will find that it's almost impossible. You'll be amazed to find that this thing that you feel oppressed and hounded by, when given carte blanche to destroy you completely, just unravels and becomes nothing. Now, when you stop doing this and go about your day, it's likely that it will rear up like usual. That is, it'll sort of arise secretly from behind and then steal you away into its little world without any of your awareness. But if you have repeatedly witnessed consciously that this is the only way anxious thoughts manifest, that it does not present the same way if instead invited and given full license to run the show, if it's instead surrendered to, it's more likely that you'll be conditioned to let it go more often. It's easier than I've made it sound. Just give it a try. I kind of forget that I was talking about beginners here, but yes, if you're more advanced, all the same things, you can just do this while you draw instead, in the moments where you don't feel the need to use your full conscious faculties while you draw. So with that, it's already a lot. Good luck, and thanks again for the question. And thanks to all the other viewers for spending another day drawing. We will continue this tomorrow and broaden the scope a bit.